I'm sorry, Miss Carter. Your name isn't listed anywhere on the will. The lawyer's voice was almost a whisper, as if lowering it could dull the blade he'd just driven between my ribs. I blinked at him across the polished mahogany table. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of the old parlor where I'd spent every Thanksgiving since I could remember. The air smelled of fresh lilies. Someone must have brought them for the reading. A celebration for everyone else. My cousin Hannah was already rifling through the stack of documents, her manicured fingers trembling in excitement. My Uncle Robert's hand rested protectively on her shoulder, a quiet reminder of where the real loyalty had always lived. All I could do was sit there, heart thudding against my ribs, while the house I'd loved more than anything was handed away like a leftover casserole. And in that moment, staring at the signatures that erased me, I felt something colder and stronger than grief. Resolve. My name is Vanessa Carter, and I was 32 when my grandfather, Richard Carter, passed away. I was the one who stayed, through his surgeries, his silence, his good days, and his worse ones. I knew how he took his tea, how he hated cold feet in bed, and how he always knocked twice on the study door even if it was already open. I knew that he slept with the window cracked open even in winter because he said, "Stale air kills faster than cold air." They didn't know any of that. Not Hannah. Not Uncle Robert. Not the rest of the vultures who only came around for birthdays and barbecues. I was the one who stayed. The Carter estate sat on 17 acres of rolling Virginia land, oak trees, wildflowers, and the kind of old money charm that made people drop their voices when they passed the front gates. It wasn't just a house. It was memory and meaning, soaked into every brick, every creaking floorboard. It was also my childhood. After my parents' car accident when I was 10, Grandpa Richard took me in. We had no one else. My father, his only son, had always been a disappointment to him. Business failures, reckless choices, but he took me in without hesitation. Maybe he saw a second chance in me. At first, it wasn't easy. He was strict, private, and rarely affectionate. I remember crying under the willow tree when he first grounded me for skipping chores, thinking he hated me. But I also remember what came after. A steaming mug of hot cocoa. A wool blanket he wrapped around my shoulders without a word. That was his way. By the time I was 16, I was helping manage the estate. I learned about property taxes, guest house repairs, local politics. I filed paperwork, handled correspondence, even cooked for him when he started losing his appetite. I gave him everything. My youth, my loyalty, my roots. And he gave me his trust. At least I thought he did. I still remember a moment from my 20s. I was 25, fresh off a nasty breakup, trying to rebuild myself. Grandpa was sitting on the back porch, sipping sweet tea, when he said, "You know, Ness, you're the only one who looks this land in the eye and doesn't blink. One day, this place should be yours." It wasn't a promise, but it was more than I ever got from the rest of the family. Uncle Robert had made his millions out west and only visited when his accountant said it was good for his image. Aunt Diane hadn't set foot on the property in 5 years. Hannah, my polished, Prada-wearing cousin, used to complain the estate had a smell. But they showed up when Grandpa's health began to decline. Suddenly, there were check-ins, phone calls, family dinners they never attended before. They'd bring wine, offer fake smiles, sit stiffly on the parlor couch like it was a stage. And I kept doing what I always did. Ordered prescriptions. Adjusted the heating. Kept track of his diet. I remember setting up a humidifier next to his bed one winter and rubbing his chest with eucalyptus oil while he tried not to show how badly he was struggling to breathe. "You're an angel, Ness," he said one night. His voice was so raspy, I almost didn't hear it. "You saved my life 100 times. If I forget that, forgive me." Those words haunted me. If I forget that, forgive me. Was he forgetting already? The last 6 months were the hardest. Grandpa started confusing names. One night, he called me by my mother's name, Helen. I didn't correct him. I just held his hand until he fell asleep. There was a moment near the end when we sat under the willow tree, the same one I cried under as a child. The breeze was gentle that day, and he was lucid, smiling at the garden I had planted for him. "You've made this place beautiful again," he said, his eyes glassy. "You brought the soul back into it." And that day I believed it again, that the estate, the land, the legacy, it was mine. Not by birthright, but by heart. I even asked the lawyer, Mr. Grayson, discreetly one afternoon, if my name was in the trust. He had simply smiled and said, "Mr. Carter handled everything thoughtfully. You'll be pleased." I took that as confirmation. So when the will was finally read and the names were announced, Robert, Diane, Hannah, and mine was nowhere to be found. I thought I had died standing up. I didn't sleep the night after the will reading. I sat in the guest bedroom under that ridiculous floral quilt, staring at the dark ceiling while my mind played every moment back on a loop. Mr. Grayson's solemn face. Hannah's triumphant smirk. Uncle Robert's hand resting possessively on the envelope that held the deed to the Carter estate. I couldn't stop hearing my grandfather's voice. "If I forget that, forgive me." The next morning, I left before dawn. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't trust my voice to stay even. As I drove back to my small rental house on the edge of Charlottesville, the numbness was almost worse than anger. That numbness didn't last. 2 days later, I sat cross-legged on my living room floor with a cardboard box full of old paperwork, mortgage documents, tax filings, trust revisions Grandpa had asked me to scan for him over the years. I was searching for something, anything, that would explain what had happened. Hours passed. The sun crawled across the hardwood floor. My phone buzzed with condolences I didn't bother to read. Finally, near midnight, I found it. A file folder labeled Carter Holdings, Private. Inside were property purchase agreements dated 3 years earlier, when Grandpa had sold a large parcel of the back acreage to a neighboring vineyard. The signatures were crisp, and so was the check stub attached, $1.8 million. And there, clipped to the last page, was a note in Grandpa's neat, old-fashioned hand. "For Ness, in the event something is overlooked." My breath caught. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, so hard it hurt. I read the note again and again, my hands trembling. I didn't understand it yet, but I knew it meant something important. The next morning, I drove straight to Mr. Grayson's office without calling first. The receptionist tried to stall me, but I must have looked feral because she gave up and waved me back. Mr. Grayson was in the middle of dictating a letter when I burst through the door. He looked up over his reading glasses, startled. "Miss Carter, What does this mean?" I demanded, thrusting the folder onto his desk. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. "He wrote this for me. Why wasn't it mentioned? You told me I'd be pleased." He lifted the note carefully, like it was something sacred. "I believe this was a separate transaction," he said slowly. "Your grandfather sold the land, and per the attached clause, he set up a private account with the proceeds." He flipped through the paperwork, frowning. "Wait, there's more. It appears he used those funds as collateral for a purchase. Miss Carter, have you seen this?" He handed me another sheet I hadn't noticed, an escrow agreement for the primary estate, pending final payment and transfer of deed to the buyer listed. I scanned the document, my eyes blurring. Buyer, Vanessa Carter. Date, 6 months ago. The words didn't make sense at first. I stared at them like they were in another language. "You're telling me," I whispered, "that he bought the estate for me?" "No," Mr. Grayson's voice softened. "He arranged for you to buy it yourself." I looked up, my throat raw. "He used the vineyard sale as your down payment," he explained. "The transaction was structured as a private sale. He intended you to finalize the paperwork after his passing. All that remains is your signature on the final deed." I felt the room tilt. I wasn't disinherited. I wasn't forgotten. He had given me the estate in the only way he trusted, by making me earn it, by ensuring no one could ever say it was handed to me. My legs nearly buckled. I sank into the nearest chair, clutching the folder to my chest. "I thought he didn't care," I said, the tears finally spilling. "I thought he didn't see me." Mr. Grayson closed the folder gently. "He saw you, Miss Carter. More clearly than anyone." The morning I drove back to the Carter estate, the sky was a sheet of unbroken gray. the kind of color that made everything look bleached and cold. I pulled the car up the gravel drive and sat there with the engine ticking as it cooled, my hands locked tight on the steering wheel. I thought about turning around, about letting them keep their illusions. But then I remembered every dinner where Uncle Robert made condescending jokes about how I'd never amount to much. Every time Hannah rolled her eyes when I spoke up. Every Sunday morning I spent clipping roses for Grandpa's bedside when no one else visited.
No.
I wasn't leaving. Not again. I stepped out and slammed the car door hard enough to make a crow startle from the oak branch overhead. Through the front windows, I could see them. Hannah, pacing with her phone pressed to her ear. Uncle Robert sitting in Grandpa's old armchair like he'd claimed the throne. Aunt Diane fussing over a stack of china she was already sorting as if the place belonged to her. They didn't hear me come in. The front hall was hushed, the air scented faintly of lemon polish. My boots thudded on the runner carpet, announcing me, and only when I reached the doorway to the sitting room did they all turn. Hannah was the first to speak, her voice high and brittle. "Vanessa, what are you doing here? You can't just." "I'm here because this is my house," I said. My voice surprised me, calm even. "And you're trespassing." Uncle Robert laughed, that dry bark that never reached his eyes. "Oh, come off it. You're upset, I understand, but this is hardly the time to." I dropped the folder onto the side table. The paper spilled across the polished wood like a declaration of war. "Read it," I told him. He squinted at the heading, then picked up the first page. The silence stretched so long I heard the mantel clock ticking behind me. Aunt Diane drifted closer, her eyes narrowing as she read over his shoulder. This is some kind of trick," she breathed. "No trick," I said. "Grandpa arranged a private sale. The final payment has already cleared. As of yesterday afternoon. The deed was signed and filed." Hannah's phone slipped from her fingers and landed on the rug. "You're lying," she whispered. "You were cut out of the will." "And this wasn't in the will," I said quietly. "This was in a trust."
Separate.
"He wanted me to have this house, but he knew exactly how you'd react if he spelled it out in front of everyone." Uncle Robert's face darkened. "You've always been ungrateful," he spat. "He gave you shelter, food." "He gave me a home," I interrupted. My heart was beating so fast I thought it might crack my ribs. "And unlike the rest of you, I never treated it like a vacation property." Aunt Diane pressed her hand to her chest, as if she might faint. "This isn't legal," she said weakly. "There will be an investigation." I turned my gaze to her, steady and unwavering. "You're welcome to call whoever you like. But you'll be calling from somewhere else. Because as of today, you no longer have the right to be here." Hannah let out a strangled sound and turned on me, her eyes glassy with rage. "You think this makes you better than us? You think buying your way in makes you a Carter?" I looked around the room, at the faded photographs on the mantel, at the scuffs in the baseboard I'd helped paint over, at the antique lamp I'd dusted every week without fail. "No," I said. "I think living here, loving him, and showing up when it mattered did that." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Uncle Robert straightened, his jaw clenched. "You can try to throw us out. But don't expect the rest of the family to back you when this blows up in your face." "I don't expect anything from you," I said. "I never have." I bent to pick up Hannah's phone and set it gently on the table. My hands were steady. My heart was still thundering, but it no longer felt like fear. It felt like freedom. It took less than 48 hours for the letters to go out. Formal notices, typed neatly, sent via certified mail and email. One to Uncle Robert, one to Aunt Diane, and one to Hannah. I wasn't cruel about it. I gave them 2 weeks to vacate the ghost houses they had started occupying, just until duel settled. But I made it clear that the Carter estate was no longer a shared family asset. It was now private property under my name. I expected backlash. I expected shouting, accusations, maybe even a legal challenge. What I didn't expect was silence. Except for Hannah's angry Instagram post, something about betrayal and bloodline theft, with a black and white photo of the estate behind her like a gothic tragedy, the family mostly retreated into quiet bitterness. Mr. Grayson assured me everything was airtight. Your grandfather may have lost his memory in the final days, he told me, but this deal, this trust, this process, it was built years in advance. He knew exactly what he was doing. Still, the loneliness sat with me like a cold draft under the door. Until Lisa showed up. Lisa was Hannah's older sister, technically my cousin, but we'd always been more like distant acquaintances. She had escaped the family years ago, moved to Seattle, married a nurse, and started her own organic gardening company. She hadn't been at the funeral, hadn't been part of the will reading drama. But 3 days after I filed the deed transfer, she called. I heard what happened, she said. I'm sorry.
I didn't know what to say.
She wasn't part of the people who hurt me, but she hadn't been part of the ones who stayed either. I never wanted any of that, she added. The fighting, the inheritance. It's poison.
I know, I said.
It's okay. No, she said firmly. It's not okay. That house. He loved you, Ness. Grandpa Richard told me once on the porch that you reminded him of his mother. Strong, stubborn. He was proud of you, even if he didn't say it enough. I swallowed hard. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm coming home, she said, and I'd like to help. Lisa arrived with muddy boots, a backpack, and 3 jars of homemade chili. We spent the first night in the kitchen, one I had cleaned and reorganized until it felt like mine again, eating out of mismatched bowls and drinking wine straight from the bottle. We didn't talk about Hannah, or the past, or the legal war that never came. We talked about the garden. The next morning, she stood on the back porch with a clipboard in one hand and a pencil tucked behind her ear. This land could feed 40 families, she said. With the right planning, the back 2 acres could be transformed into a regenerative garden. I blinked. You mean like farm?
She grinned.
Community-supported agriculture. You've got space, soil, and heritage.
People will eat that up.
Literally. And just like that, something shifted. For months, the estate had felt like a haunted relic. A battleground where I won, but didn't know what to do with the silence left behind.
But now?
Now it could become something more. We started small. A single weekend open house for local vendors and neighbors. The Carter Grove Gathering, Lisa called it. We offered homemade jam, fresh produce, and storytelling under the willow tree. At first, I was terrified. I hadn't hosted anything since Grandpa's 90th birthday. But people came. Dozens of them. Some old neighbors I hadn't seen since high school. Others who remembered my grandfather's generosity during the town's leaner years. An elderly woman approached me as I was pouring lemonade. You must be Vanessa, she said, eyes crinkling. Richard talked about you all the time. I smiled awkwardly. Good things, I hope.
She leaned in.
He once said if he could plant your strength into the soil, this land would never go barren. The words caught me like a hook in the chest. I stood there a long moment after she left, the paper cup in my hand shaking slightly.
Strength.
Planted into the soil. Was that what he'd done? Not just given me land, but handed me the chance to grow something bigger than revenge? Lisa moved into the East Wing guest house a week later. Together, we cleared out the old barn, painted signs, and laid out a plan for the next season. She taught me about seed cycles, compost ratios, and companion planting. And slowly, the grief began to bloom into purpose. One afternoon, as I was clipping lavender for drying, I noticed a car parked at the far end of the driveway. A sleek black SUV. I recognized it instantly. Uncle Robert. He didn't get out. Just sat there, engine running. Watching. I stood still. Waited. Finally, the driver's side window rolled down. He didn't smile. Looks different, he said, eyes scanning the front porch. It is different, I replied. You turned it into some kind of farm? A legacy, I said. One that gives back. He looked at me for a long time, something unreadable in his expression. Your father would have been proud, he said at last. And then he drove away. 3 months later, the Carter estate was unrecognizable in the best possible way. The peeling white shutters were newly painted a warm sage green. The porch swing, once half-rotted, had been rebuilt, its cedar slats polished to a soft sheen. My grandmother's heirloom roses were blooming along the picket fence again, a riot of crimson and cream. And in the back fields, the real transformation had taken root. Rows of vegetables, trellises of tomatoes, plots of corn and squash. Raised beds bursting with herbs. A row of young fruit trees in protective cages. Lisa's vision, our vision, made real. It was a hot Saturday morning when the first Carter Grove market officially opened. Cars lined the gravel drive. Children ran across the yard with paper cups of fresh-pressed cider. I stood near the old oak tree, a clipboard in one hand and a pen tucked behind my ear, just like Lisa. Every so often, I had to remind myself this wasn't a dream. This was the life I had built.
Not handed to me.
Not stolen from someone else, but planted, watered, and coaxed into being with my own hands. A little after 10, I saw Hannah. She was standing on the edge of the parking area, her sunglasses shielding her eyes. For a moment, I thought she might just turn around and leave. But she didn't. She walked slowly toward me, her heels sinking slightly into the soft grass. She looked thinner than I remembered, her sharp edges softened by something I couldn't quite name.
Hi, she said.
Her voice was tentative, almost wary. Hi, I replied, setting my clipboard on the table beside me. Her gaze swept over the yard. The white vendor tents, the produce displays, the families chatting in small clusters. I heard about this, she murmured. Lisa posted photos. I nodded. It's beautiful, she said finally. There was a long silence. A dog barked somewhere near the front gates. I'm not here to fight, she continued, or argue about what happened. I waited. She took a deep breath. I don't think I ever understood what this place meant to you. To Grandpa. I folded my arms loosely. It's not too late to understand. She looked at me then, really looked, and something in her expression shifted. The defensive tilt of her chin lowered. I'm sorry, she whispered. For everything I said. For the way I acted. I believed her. And I realized with a start that I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I gestured toward the long table covered in jars of honey and baskets of peaches. Would you like to walk with me? She hesitated, just for a second, and then nodded. We moved slowly along the vendor stalls. Neighbors greeted me with warm smiles and a kind of casual familiarity that still made my chest ache. For so long, I'd felt like an outsider. Now I was a host, a caretaker. We paused near a display of heirloom tomatoes. I remember Grandpa's stories about these, Hannah said quietly. He'd talk about how his mother grew them during the Depression. I smiled. He made me plant a row every year. Said it was good for the soul to watch something survive. She swallowed hard. I didn't come here to ask for anything, she said. I just needed to see it. To see you. I thought of all the ways I could have answered. A dozen old hurts, all lined up like knives I could have thrown. Instead, I said the truest thing I knew. I hope you find your own place that feels like this. Her eyes shimmered behind her sunglasses. Maybe I will. By early afternoon, the sun was high and golden, spilling over the farmhouse roof in a soft haze. Lisa emerged from the barn with a crate of seedlings balanced on one hip. Full house today, she called over the noise of the crowd. I think we're going to sell out. I grinned, feeling something unfurl in my chest, a gentle, steady joy. I hope we do, I said. We walked together back toward the porch, our steps slow and easy. At the edge of the lawn, I paused to take it all in. Children laughing as they chased each other between the vegetable rows. An old man with a canvas bag full of tomatoes. A teenage girl holding her grandmother's hand. A home, not just for me, but for everyone who needed it.